What's good, party people? This is According to Woods, and I have the honor and privilege of talking to a creative artist, a man of many facets. You might know him as Vladimir Tempest or Kid Knight, but he is the one, the only Mason. Mason, what's going on?
Hey, how's it going? Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here because I saw you at Traditional Wrestling Entertainment in Stanton, California, a couple weekends ago, and shout out to Traditional Wrestling Entertainment, Bill Chu, John De La
Hmm.
O, where how's the whole thing? But I was just like, I love pro wrestling, and whether we call it, Frank Gotch and George Hackensmith,
Hmm.
or Shinsuke Nakamura, or two of my favorite wrestlers right now are like Danhausen and Jonathan Grisham, which couldn't
Hmm.
be further on the pro wrestling spectrum. But in all of my pro wrestling viewership, I've never seen a you before. Like you were coming from Space Romania, you had a gent with you. I was just like
Hmm.
I was totally enthralled. I was like it sold it, and it was just this little gem, in this pro wrestling landscape that I'd never seen or seen portrayed before, and I was just like, this is so refreshing.
Awesome. That's great to hear. And I think you more or less hit the nail on the head because I I come from the background that pro wrestling doesn't have to be one thing. There's not one uh, definition of professional wrestling. Like you said, you brought up, AEW is bringing a very different product than the WWE is bringing up a very different product from Impact Wrestling, and then versus all the smaller indies. Some of them have strong gimmicks. Some of them are very like pure action focused, competition focused. So I'm glad that that I could kind of bring that character out and it would get over outside of sort of the context he was created in, which was a show, Super Awesome Showdown. But that people are, yeah, really, really enjoying it, really digging it.
And I mean, I definitely want to get into Super Awesome Showdown because I think it's tremendous.
Hmm.
But I guess to kind of start at the beginning and not putting the wagon before the horse. But I mean, how did you get your start or start watching wrestling?
So, oh man, so I started training a long, long, long time ago. It was in 1999 when I first started training. But it was one of the spectrums of pro wrestling, sadly, is there's a very like legit side of it, and then there's kind of like the scummy side of it that kind of comes out of the organized crime and carnival days that persisted much more in the late '90s. I think it's continuing to diminish as we go forward. But it was a real bad school. The trainer didn't teach me very well, but I thought I was doing great. I thought everything was great there until the wheels sort of fell apart on that, and I ended up luckily in Mexico. The pro wrestling world is tends to be kind of small, so when people heard that there was a school, the one that I was going to, kind of the scam school, a bunch of wrestlers came out to check it out, and I was able to make some connections there who trained in Tijuana Lucha Libre with Phobia. So I was able to get into Phobia school, and he started to set me straight. Um, and it's been the my relationship with wrestling has been, I don't know if rocky is the right word, but I've definitely had my ups and downs. So I've kind of been in and out over the last 20 years, just either like bouncing off the politics or having other things going on in my life where I'd take, 2 or 3 year long breaks and kind of have to restart. So I'm kind of on a new, now we had COVID. So coming out of COVID is where I'm at now. Oh, and sorry, a huge part, and probably the person who had the biggest influence on me. So after I trained lucha libre, um, a guy Mike Rapata, the Colorado kid, who's he was an NWA
For
champion.
yeah, absolutely.
So he worked in WCW. He had a school, and he's the one uh, who like really set me straight on like the business and the business side of everything, work rate wise. The stuff that I didn't find many other people taught was like how to actually like make money, how to not kill yourself, what people are looking for, and the real like performance aspect side of it, the character aspect side of it. And then as it directly applies to wrestling, he was absolutely invaluable. He's still I consider him a mentor of mine today. Um, and so he was kind of the catalyst for sort of the style of wrestling that I do now, or the style of characters that I do now.
I love it, and that's a name that doesn't really get brought up a lot. The Colorado Kid, Mike
Hmm.
Rapata, because he was carrying the flag and the banner for the National Wrestling Alliance when it was maybe in the doldrums.
Hmm.
He was literally positioned, I believe, right between Sabu and Chris Candido in terms of title reigns. But there was one stretch where he had it for several years. I remember reading the PWI and seeing him, in the like that back page where they list all the champions or whatever, and it's top
Hmm.
for you know a long time, at least a 3 year stretch, 2 or 3 year stretch. Colorado Kid was essentially the kingpin of the NWA.
Yeah, that's a super good memory there. Absolutely. Yeah, Colorado Kid. I didn't remember he had won it from Chris Candido, but I did remember him saying he dropped it eventually to Sabu. But the fact that you know that is just like is kind of blowing my mind right now, just off the top of your head. But yeah, he was and he came from kind of the southern like royalty, guys like the Jarretts and Jerry Lawler and things like that were sort of part of his upbringing. That those are the people who trained with him or were his first matches or kind of seasoned him up. So he was just an absolute and still is just an absolute just diamond mine of wrestling knowledge, especially working wrestling knowledge, like making it in the business and making it work.
No, absolutely. No, and I live and breathe. But it's when it happens in combat sports, and for me, pro wrestling is very much a combat sport.
Hmm.
Is sport. You don't risk your body, life, and limb, and not call it a sport. So, but combat sports, whether it be Muay Thai, Jiu Jitsu, pro wrestling, catch wrestling, MMA, like that's just where my brain just kind
Hmm.
of channels in on. So if I read a kind of a tidbit somewhere, it gets stored to memory. That's it. And it's funny that you mentioned Mike being a kind of a southern wrestling guy, because when you were talking about your kind of your dalliance of wrestling, and maybe even stepping away for a time or two, that reminds me of Roughhouse Fargo, Jackie Fargo's brother, back
Hmm.
in the old Memphis territory, where he would he trained and everything like that, but he would come once a year, and his gimmick was, and this is totally Memphis, right? But he was like, oh, Jackie Fargo was essentially, one of the kingpins before Jerry Jarrett became the king and what have
Hmm.
you. He was somebody that Jerry Lawler and Jerry Jarrett both grew up watching, and anytime that he would get in, in a kind of a quandary, or a team would gang up on him, he'd say, "Oh, don't worry, I'm gonna call my brother Roughhouse." And Roughhouse Fargo, or Don Fargo, would come in, and he supposedly escaped an asylum, right?
Hmm.
And he was just crazy. He was just absolutely maniacal and insane or whatever. But he would come in because the reality is, like, Don Fargo had a good paying job somewhere,
Yeah.
But if he can come in and pick up a payday and team with his brother, hey, more power to you. And
Yeah. Do it.
but that reminds me of a Rough House Fargo. Your kind of approach to pro wrestling. That's when you said it, I was just like, oh, that's like Rough House Fargo, or any of those guys in the AWA. Baron von Raschke was Jimmy Raschke, and he was a teacher through his whole run. He's an evil German on TV this way, and he is telling you to do push-ups in gym class. I just think it's fun.
No, that's great. Yeah, that touches on again kind of the spectrums of professional wrestling and professional wrestling careers. And I think one of my great hopes is that there is a spectrum of like availability to the sport where guys, who maybe are older but have loved pro wrestling their whole life, and they kind of want to have train and learn to be safe and all that, but kind of have their like Sunday softball league level of pro wrestling and have them have a place at the table and them have a spot to perform, just the same as the people who are working their ass off all day every day in the gym, living breathing wrestling to try to get that WWE contract or that AEW contract, or get flown out to Japan for the biggest shows in Japan, Triple Mania, all that kind of thing. The people who are really really gunning to make it a living. And I think there should be not just space for them, but I'd love to have more space for everybody to get involved who wants to, who's willing to put in the work to make it happen.
No, absolutely. And I think, and it's funny because, one would argue that maybe, right now, from the outside looking in, might be a downtime in pro wrestling. Maybe the WWE isn't what you like. And, if you tune it on or whatever, you're like, what is this? This is not what I was used to when I grew up. If you grew up in the Attitude Era or maybe the 80s style of
Hmm.
wrestling and what have you, or, AEW, there's too many flippy people and blah blah blah, whatever. But to me, I think it's amazing because we have guys like you and guys, girls, people who identify as transgender, non-binary, or what have you. Like there's Effie. Effie is one of the centerpieces of GCW, and that's another
Hmm.
show where you'll have. I remember the first GCW show that I went to. Like you had like a crazy 6-man scramble. Everybody was like flying, whatever, just spot, 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 spot.
Hmm.
And then after it there was another like tag team match. Then it was like Effie versus Too Cold Scorpio. And this is during the like this is the first show in LA, after the COVID lockdown. So
Yeah.
Scorp was wearing his mask and everything like that. And then there was like a comedy match with Ron Fudges, followed by a death match with like G Raver and Orlando Colon. No,
Hmm.
Alex Colon with light tubes and everything. And then up at the top was Minoru Suzuki versus Jonathan Grisham. And
Yeah.
you're like, and that's to me that's wrestling. You've got everybody represented, and like you were saying, like I think wrestling can be an awesome place, and just like you were saying, yes, it has its roots in carnies, and there are some charlatans. There's a lot of charlatans, both
Hmm.
behind the scenes and maybe even in front of the camera and what have you, and that almost lends itself to certain people who love it and are creative and can contribute. Well, you don't fit a certain type or whatever or what we're looking for, and
Yeah.
you're blackballed, so to speak. But I think it's an amazing time where, because of the advent of the internet, if you're doing something cool, all it takes is one share, one upload, one tweet, whatever, and
Hmm.
people have access to you and what you're doing. And I think it's probably one of the most creatively enriching times in pro wrestling history because the big major promotion in the WWE isn't fulfilling everybody's fancy of what they want in wrestling.
Yeah. No, and I think the the Attitude Era and that around that time, there's sort of like two pillars, which was WWE and WCW. ECW is in the mix, of course, but um, my experience, at least at the time, is that as far as like the indie scene and other options, it actually wasn't super broad. There wasn't a ton of options. There wasn't a ton of places for independent wrestlers to work, smaller guys to work, both in stature and clout. But I feel now as the sort of the towers of the WWE have come down. They're not pulling the like eights and nines. They're not the only force in wrestling. AEW's got a good following, but I think it's spread out wide now. It's getting closer to the way I learned the territory days were like, where there's promotions kind of all over the place, and all kinds of people were starting up shows, and there was opportunities for people who weren't under contract to make a living doing wrestling, and I think we're seeing more opportunities for more people who aren't under contract with one of the big companies to actually make a living, be able to travel around and make enough money doing shows and drawing people, making it worthwhile for the promoters too. That I haven't seen, I do not remember being a part of, the late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2010s. That's something that's, from my viewpoint, happening now.
No, 1,000%, 1,000%. But I mean, obviously, can you call back to like some of your like at the peak of your viewership and your fandom?
Hmm.
Um, what were you watching during that time period? Like wrestlers or promotions or what have you?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I can start from the very early '80s. People, I think you and me might be pretty close to the same age, but people that are close to our age who grew up in the '80s, everybody watched WWF at the time. That was sort of every young kid's sort of like real life superhero fantasy show that they got to watch every Saturday. Or at least that's the way it was for me and my brother and my friends and family. But in the for me, one of the things that kind of broke my heart, I found out it was not real. It was fake, predetermined sport. And I'm a wrestler who has no issues using the term fake, because to me, fake doesn't take away from the fact that it is incredibly athletic. It's incredibly dangerous. It's a ton of hard work. Cirque du Soleil is fake. Those aren't real flying people and those aren't real animals. But man, anybody has to be incredibly impressed by what a Cirque du Soleil performer can do physically. And it's not the same work, but it's similar in where I have no issues calling it fake. Some people might want to punch me for saying that, but that's with 100% respect. But anyways, found out it was fake, and then the steroid scandal hit. And for me, as like a 7-year old, 8-year old, it was like not only are the matches fake, but like their muscles and their like athleticism was fake too. It was like all pumped up. So totally disillusioned. That was my first sort of wrestling heartbreak. So I went through most of my life, kind of being down on wrestling, making fun of people who watched it. It's for dumb redneck hillbillies or whatever, kind of the Andy Kaufman take, at least his character's take on wrestling, until I had a friend who loved wrestling, watched it all the time, and this was like maybe junior high school era, about the time when the just before the Attitude Era was really getting started. But I teased him all the time, and then Monday nights when Raw was just starting, he'd be like, "Oh, wrestling's on." I'd be like, "Okay, I'm going home." But there was a day that I decided to just stay. I was just gonna stay, and I was gonna make fun of the show. I was just gonna talk crap the whole time, but I was gonna hang out and watch wrestling. And I can remember it was Gold Dust and Mankind had a match on this episode of Raw, and it was something that like it totally blew my mind that this was something that pro wrestling could be. These two characters who were incredibly like psychologically engaging. They had a very sort of like three-dimensional um, position. It wasn't just like, here's the good guy, say your prayers, eat your vitamins. Here's the bad guy. He's, some foreigner, usually an Iranian or an Iraqi or something like that was kind of the way they went in the late 80s and 90s. But, here's a guy who's crazy, but the way Mick Foley delivered promos, it was very super engaging, and it wasn't simple. And the way they had Goldust's character set up at the time, where he sort of used he like weaponized homophobia. He was a guy who they put over as not gay, but he'd wear women's clothes, or he'd wear tight clothes, or things that cross dressing or close to cross dressing. and he'd act, super sexualized, and to freak out to get into the minds of his opponents because his opponents were homophobes. So that's how he was able to beat him. That was his gimmick, and it was just like, how is this like so like interesting, like complex, like character work going on, and then combined with like the action, combined with the fact that it's like live in front of an audience. It was kind of at that moment where I was like, oh shit, like I've been talking shit about wrestling for so long, but it's fucking awesome now. Like this is really really cool, and that was kind of the thing that got me really into it and like watching it, every week. Eventually it grew into watching WCW and WWE or WWF at the time, like flipping channels back and forth. A buddy of mine had a pirate cable box, so we were able to watch all the ECW pay-per-views when they came out. Um, and I can say seeing ECW, guys like Sabu and Just Incredible, and I don't know if this is like an insult to put it this way, but seeing the WWE and the WCW, when I watched that, I was like, this is amazing. This is something I'm not qualified for. This is something I can never be a pro wrestler, right? It's like, it's an impossibility. But seeing ECW and I guess seeing guys closer to my size, seeing, really sort of off the wall gimmicks on guys who weren't super athletic, like, the Amish Warrior, who was a big part of ECW at the time, or great workers who again weren't like 6'8" super body guys. The Chris Candidos and the Rob Van Dams, guys who were closer to my size, not again like superhero, totally
The
out of the
physique.
normal spectrum, physique wise or
Yeah.
personality wise, character wise. Um, that's when I was like, maybe this is something I can actually learn how to do. Like that was watching ECW for that year was like, okay, this is something that I might be able to figure out how to do. Like, then started looking into schools and stuff online and things like that. Funnily enough, so in high school, I wrestled. I did collegiate, style wrestling, and some other sports. And because I was athletic, I was recruited into theater, um, and I did some theater classes and things, but they were like working real hard to pull me in because athletic guys can dance, and for musical theater, they needed dancers. So uh, I was got leaned on heavily to get into musical theater, and that ended up got really into theater sort of through that angle, and I was on cast for a show Fiddler on the Roof, and one of the guys in the ensemble cast was training to be a pro wrestler. And we had talks, we became friends just talking about wrestling. And eventually he led on, he's like, oh, by the way, I've been training to pro wrestle at this school, which was a crap school, but he didn't know that, and neither did I. But that was sort of my entrance into it. He's like, yeah, here's where the school's at. Here's their number, call them up. And that was sort of from wrestling. It's like from wrestling to theater into pro wrestling was kind of my pathway into the business, I guess you'd say.
Which I mean, first off, I mean Mick Foley and Dustin Rhodes, Dustin Reynolds, like that's and at their peak,
Mm-hmm.
I there couldn't be a better way or jumping off point for you to kind of get re-engaged and reintroduced to pro wrestling. Those are two of the most creative guys, and I mean, in one, Dustin Rhodes, he's an agent over in AEW, and
Mm-hmm.
there's why. Him and Fit Finlay, and Jamie Noble, right? The reason why we had a Divas Revolution and it was able to be fortified is because those guys are putting together the matches,
Mm-hmm.
and being, almost stepping away from the bra and panties and gravy bowl matches of the Attitude Era into what we now know. I can watch a women's match anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be an indie or, in the WWE or AEW, and it's I don't look at it at all any different than the males who wrestle. You know,
Yeah.
so to have those two guys, and two guys who you're a creative type, which you would find out later in your
Hmm.
your ventures into musical theater, a creative type. So those two are two of the most creative gents in the wrestling business, and they had a synergy and a chemistry long before they got to the WWF, and they were
Hmm.
cutting their teeth in WCW as the Natural Dustin Rhodes and Cactus Jack respectively. That, I mean, you couldn't have came in a better point. Obviously, the misogyny and the homophobia, that doesn't age too well at all.
Yeah. Well, again, I liked it because it was again like the homophobia was like weaponized. Like he used it. It wasn't something they put over really as a good thing, at least at the time. I would say Goldust was sort of in like kind of an oddball tweener. If I was going to give him like he wasn't like a full on heel all the time. He wasn't a full on he definitely wasn't a full on face, but it was that like the homophobia. It wasn't that he acted gay or perceived gay, acted feminine, but his opponent's homophobia, the fact that that freaked them out,
Mhm.
having someone who is not super masculine or not acting super masculine in a wrestling ring. Um, that's not it's not the ideal, but that was, I think, actually pretty progressive, or the beginnings of sort of progress in the wrestling world. The way they approached that gimmick and that angle, or in those angles that they had with him.
No, 100%, 100%. Now, I mean, and it's kind of fun because even though you did collegiate style wrestling, right? But your kind of dalliance in musical theater might have even prepared you more for the wrestling business, more so than the legit wrestling, right?
Yeah. So I trained. One of the things I talked about when I trained in Super Awesome Showdown. Pretty much nearly all the performers there, we were either trained by Mike Rapata or trained by like me and the other people who are trained by Mike. We didn't say when we trained there. I was very explicit to say I'm not training you to be a pro wrestler to get into the pro wrestling business. I'm training them to be on Super Awesome Showdown. So it's a lot of things that uh, I either intentionally didn't teach them or didn't worry so much about, because my intention wasn't to launch them into the wrestling business. And people who wanted that, which some did, there was better schools. Uh, but what I always said is that people who had um, theater, like everybody comes to training and to start their wrestling career with different advantages and I'd say disadvantages, but it's mostly just like skills they need to learn and like that they haven't learned before. I don't even see them, too much as like a nothing in wrestling to me is a disadvantage. Even if you're fat, you can use fat as a gimmick. If you're ugly, you can use ugly as a gimmick. Like those can all turn into just straight advantages. But things like public speaking, if you've had public speaking courses or done theater courses or improv classes, you're going to be able to do character work and you're going to have an advantage over the people who didn't have that background coming in. And it's the same thing if you've done collegiate wrestling, especially if you've done Greco-Roman style wrestling, you have an advantage over people who have never done sports in their life before they, show up to their first training class. Um, so yeah, it was definitely a huge advantage for the character aspects of it. My first promo was a good one. The first one I cut on a show was good, and they've only gotten better since. So uh, I could say from experience, there's some people who have never cut a good promo, who are great wrestlers and very very successful. So, but it's not that they're crappy people. It's just they didn't have sort of those advantages or backgrounds that I came in with.
No, 100%. Which, I mean, I, just subtle nuances, at traditional wrestling entertainment. There was only two people that really cut promos on the mic that were given the chance to take the mic.
Hmm.
You were one of them, and it was like I when I saw you come out with the with the helmets and what have you. And for those who don't already know, I mean, one of the characters in which you play, Vlad Tempest, I mean, hails from Space Romania.
Hmm.
When I again, to me, it was like so outside the box, and then like I was already intrigued and engaged before you even stepped through the curtain, and then see like the first half of the orb that is the helmet, and I was like, oh, this is different, and the spacesuits, and I was just like, it was a feast for the mind, really,
Yeah.
and I was just like, oh, this is different. I'm getting like goosebumps talking about it because
That's
again,
so cool. Thank
yeah,
you.
because I mean I watch a lot of wrestling, but again, your approach was something I'd never seen before, and I was like, this, there's another promotion, Wrestling Pro Wrestling, right, and they have
Hmm.
uh, I probably butchering the name, but basically it's like the slithering uh, sneaky or whatever. But
Yeah.
it's a gentleman who has a theater background as well, and all of his promos are in a
Hmm.
lisp, and everything you basically purvey it to enhance that lisp, which makes
Hmm.
it like amazing, right? And again, you took your theater background to really develop this character, which I don't, especially with the WWE, right? And I
Hmm.
hate to like poke holes or whatever. I don't get Roman Reigns. I myself am a half Polynesian, and I was like, there should be reasons why I get Roman Reigns, especially now that he's doing like an Islander gimmick, tribal chief or whatever. But he doesn't.
Hmm.
I don't get it because I grew up in Inglewood where people really get shot. Here's a guy who is a former SWAT guy, and then he teams with his cousins who are from a penitentiary, and he's a former SWAT guy that has a move in his arsenal called the
Hmm.
drive-by. There's two, and then has a shield, a bulletproof vest, supposedly, and he sells punches to the chest, like literally, covers
Hmm.
and everything. That doesn't make sense. Like in my mind, and I'm not just trying to put you over because you're here. Your everything that you did basically enhanced your character.
Hmm.
Just like when Brian Danielson, Daniel Bryan, when he was doing the Eco Warrior deal and unveiled the belt, the Eco Warrior belt, that
Yeah.
enhanced the character. It enhanced the presentation,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Whereas what conventional wisdom in the WWE will tell you is the top guy. I think you're doing a little bit better in terms of a lot better actually in terms of character development
Hmm.
than that guy has in 6 years. And that's nothing against him. Obviously, when you have that baton and have the ear of the king or Vince McMahon, right? You can only do certain things and what have you. You might have a certain template you have to follow. But like to me, you're more engaging to an audience that probably has never seen you before,
Hmm.
and captures the imagination of what wrestling could be than what they're offering.
Yeah. No, that's so the man, there's a lot for me to unpack there, but uh I agree pretty much with every sentiment that you had there. Man, where to start? Yeah, so for me, and this is, like I said, some people don't come with the same tools, the same background. And sometimes, with a company like the WWE, they have interests beyond just the creative presentation of the product, right? They have to think about Good Morning America interviews, right? And a guy like Vladimir Tempest, he might be fun once, he might be something sort of memorable, but if he's got to, show up and do interview after interview after interview, people can follow it. So someone like, John Cena, I think was absolutely a masterclass at kind of being the top guy, sort of the main guy on the promotion, who could do all the rounds with all the talk shows, with all the other stuff. Um, so I think that's a situation where having something that's, too over the top or too kind of in depth as far as a character goes, may not be the best choice for a guy like Roman Reigns, or a top guy, sort of the person in that position as like the brand, the ambassador for the whole brand, the guy at the top of the poster for everybody to Google search. Um, because there's guys, Dan Danhausen, you mentioned before, is, I'd say, we're kind of in a similar lane, but I don't see, Danhausen being a top guy, being that guy, being that main promotional person. And again, all the other outside interests, being marketable to Saudi Arabia, being marketable in, France and England and all these other countries that they broadcast in. Um, there's layers of like complexity and consideration that Roman Reigns has and the business guys at WWE have, that I'll never have to answer to, luckily enough. But I also respect the fact that they do have to take all those things into consideration. So sometimes exactly what the fans want, or exactly what specific fans want, isn't sort of what they can deliver all the time. But the other side of that, some of the best, I guess, sort of advice, one of the things I learned over the years, and this is, inside baseball, this is not Mark shit. Marks care about belts, but belts, like title belts, championships, they're a gimmick. They're a prop. And if you're over, you don't need a belt. And if you're really over, it's not even in the promotion's best interest to give you a belt, because you'll sell merchandise regardless, and it's better to give it to a guy who needs the belt to move merchandise so you can get, so the business can get its cut, sort of a thing. If two people are selling 20,000 t-shirts, it's better than one guy selling 30,000 and one guy selling 5,000. So some people's characters and gimmicks too, they're kind of wrapped around the belts and the championships and sort of the top guy thing, and some people's aren't. And I think, and one of the things that I learned is that there's pathways to success that aren't that climb the mountain side of it. I'm sure Danhausen is doing great on Pro Wrestling Tees. He's probably doing better than, uh, you know, some of the top guys in AEW right now. The guys who are, in the scramble for the title belts or whatever that's going on over there. And I think that's the case for a lot of guys. Mick Foley won the title once or twice, but he was a merchandise king, so he didn't need it. And it was in the WWE's best interest, I think, not to put it on a guy like Mick Foley, because he was already over without it. And giving it to him wouldn't have built up anything more, especially on the business side of stuff. Again, that's sort of the viewpoint, and some of that was directly taught to me, especially the belts. The belt is a gimmick, and it's a prop. In the theater terms, or in movie terms, it's a MacGuffin. And that's all it really is. And there's people who mark out for it, wrestlers who mark out for it, thinking that's actually when they're important or they've made it. And that's just not the case. And, it's the flip side is making sure, it is an honor to be given that responsibility of sort of like carrying a brand that way, which is kind of, what world title belts, the main championship of a promotion, sort of is. But there's no shame in not having it, and it might be more beneficial for a wrestler's career to not touch them. So it can go a lot of ways.
No, absolutely, and that's I guess, the beauty, and depending on where you are in terms of your own kind of vantage point, the
Hmm.
curse of pro wrestling, right? Where you could see people literally breaking their necks, for belts to be a top guy, or what have you, and the person that's in the locker room that maybe does five moves and maybe hasn't done, taken a bump in 2 years,
Hmm.
right? And you hear the reactions, right, from beyond the curtain. You're like, what are they doing? Whatever. And you thought they were probably doing like 80 high spots and killing the territory. And
Hmm.
no, it was just like a poke to the eye, sell, walking around, goading the fans on the outside and what have you. And that's it. And that could be some of the biggest pops on the night. And they're not the champion, so to speak, but uh, when people are going home, and they're getting in their cars or turning off the TV, and their last kind of memory, chances are it's going to be not a 5-star match. It's probably going
Hmm.
to be where they're laughing, engrossed, like crying, wanting somebody to get its comeuppance. It's those little psychological tropes that really engage.
Yeah, and I think there's again Roman Reigns has an enviable position, being sort of the top guy, main eventing pay-per-views, getting paid a lot of money. But to me, kind of the envious position, the position I would want if I was, say, a wrestler in the WWE, would be the position of like the New Day. You know, the New Day, they're so over, they're so money that they don't even have to wrestle at WrestleMania. But they're gonna get them on the show. Like they're not gonna do WrestleMania without the New Day, so they're gonna host. So here's guys who get to dress up in costumes. They don't have to take bumps. They're making a WrestleMania payday. They're probably selling a ton of merchandise and getting their cut on the back end. That's the professional side of it. And that is a really cool spot to be. And that's super successful. And, the crowd got behind them to try to get him belts. And occasionally they'd pick up a tag team championship, or, Kofi Kingston's infamous world championship reign happened for us. And it's not even that they don't deserve it, but that position is something that, to me, as a wrestler, that's something I want more so than the championship position. And the flip side is the people they're over with, the fans, they want to see those people as champions, those people that they love being champions. But for them, the most valuable thing is to have a ton of TV time, a ton of merchandise sales, you know, a top half spot on a pay per view, and they can't really do any better than that as far as like what's the best for them in their careers, sort of a thing.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing that you mentioned about like the New Day specifically is the character development. There's a lot of moving pieces, right?
Hmm.
There's obviously, Xavier Woods, he came, his first kind of introduction to the mainstream WWE audience is like literally they didn't even have a gimmick for him. They just gave him Brodus Clay's gimmick. Like,
Hmm.
here's the Funkadactyls, here's the music. They literally ushered him on Raw as somebody else's gimmick. And it wasn't even like a gimmick of times gone by. Like a Ted DiBiase to JBL to Alberto Del Rio, and there was probably a
Hmm.
5 to 8 year gap between all of those characters, maybe even more. But like, no, that the Blurus Clay guy was like literally a year and a half ago, and then you're gonna give like we know what this what are we doing, right? And then you've got Big E, and again, like I loved the first incarnation of Big E, where he was doing the 5 count in NXT, and he had the lifting chalk, and he you know patted his hands and threw the chalk in the air. I thought it was a great visual, especially to play it in a video game. It was like
Yeah.
and then they didn't know what to do with him, which is you know, guys and girls they don't know what to do with that are on the roster.
Yeah.
Uh, that doesn't happen at all today, right? No,
Hmm.
never. But I mean, they put him with AJ Lee and Dolph Ziggler and whatever, and it wasn't until we got to see who he was in terms of a character as a person with the New Day, and especially what the New Day was supposed to be as this kind of militant black, faction, and then they were like, what is it, like preachers or what have you? It
Yeah,
was
I think
just
they're supposed to
all,
be like a revivalist movement sort of thing. That's what, the New Day.
yeah,
And
and then Kofi, Kofi, I just revert back to like Kofi's whole career, in kind of two spots, and that's just not to negate the cool stuff that he's done because he's done a lot of cool shit in his career,
yeah.
but it's really marred by you know uh, Triple H was like, "You're not Jamaican anymore," and just kind of calling him out in front of a live audience, in front of millions of people, and
Yeah,
Randy Orton, stupid, stupid, and unfortunately, that's as much as I want to kind of get behind him. I they've shown their cards. They've told me as far as what Kofi is going to get to in that company, right there. So
yeah,
I'm like, but the three of them together, and you would think maybe oblong parts in other iterations, but it doesn't even matter. You could put Kofi any iteration of the New Day, Kofi and Big E and Woods and Kofi, whatever, and it works. It pops. They sell
yeah,
merchandise. They get people, enthralled. If you went to a TV taping, when they were really on top, they would just send them out there in between the, commercial breaks to keep the crowd hot. That's
yeah,
how over they are.
yeah, and that's how valuable they were, and without a belt, in their hands. Um, yeah, they're definitely the prime example. If I ever try to explain to people, like, again, it's not saying belts are worthless, but like, as a worker, it doesn't have to be the most important thing in your career. It doesn't have to be even anything you're chasing after at all. Maybe they'll come, maybe they won't. But and I'll say that it changes depending on sort of gimmick, because there's a lot of people's gimmicks is that they're athletes. Their gimmick is that they are a wrestler, and for that character type, which is and that sort of I don't know, I guess motivation is that's something where, yeah, they do sort of have to revolve around the championship, because they're an athlete technically, and this is a competition technically, and so that's the only direction kind of for them to go, um, which, that's I didn't go that way, because I didn't think I would have the longevity athletically to be able to do that forever. And again, once I was sort of given the secret, to me, the secret was like, yeah, the belts don't matter. It worked. It's funny that touches on the other advice that I gave, and it's sad because I don't watch a ton of wrestling these days. I catch sometimes a big pay per view or a big show, usually a show that like a friend of mine's on that they have an important match or something. Is when I watch as a fan, but the the best advice I ever was given for promos, especially when you're cutting a promo against or on somebody else, is you put them over. So it's really sad for me to hear, and it looks like they reaped their reward for sort of breaking the rule. Triple H sort of burying the fact that Kofi Kingston wasn't doing his Jamaican accent thing anymore. I saw Randy Orton basically no sell um, Bray Wyatt's horror gimmick for like a year. He was just like, no, I'm not scared. I'm not going to react to spiders. I'm going to beat you in your haunted house. And that more or less to me, that kind of buried Bray Wyatt's gimmick. All the heat that he was getting, all the lightning that he created was just sort of snuffed out. And it's because they weren't willing to put that over. Um, and you don't have to put it over at the expense of yourself, but imagine if Triple H made fun of the Undertaker. Said, "Are you're wearing a trench coat? Are you going to shoot up your high school?" Made some sort of
Yeah,
joke like that. Like that would have taken the wind out of Undertaker's sails 15 years ago. If they weren't willing to put over the gimmick, everybody was on the same team, everybody was on board, and they're good down to make their opponents look just as good as they can. So that's something, yeah, good advice. And it's something, the great promo guys like Mick Foley, who's, probably the best, one of the best, if not the best ever, one of the best ever. Like he never put like his opponents down. He never buried their gimmick or broke character, for their gimmick. And it made him look better because he was overcoming whatever they were. Oh, you're a supernatural man with an urn that gives you magical powers, making you able to choke slam Yokozuna. Like he'll put that over, and then if he gets a win on you, he looks strong, and if he gets beat by you, he got beat by somebody who was had magical powers. Like he's over either way, or he's more over either way because his opponent he put over his opponent in the interview.
No, I agree. I agree. It's that kind of adage about, if I tell you, I mean, I tell everybody that, you're nothing, and I beat you, what I really gain from it? Because I
Hmm.
beat somebody who I basically told was inferior to anybody who would listen, right? And if they beat me, well, guess what? Now I look like trash because, again, you basically nullified me in the eyes of the viewing audience. And, like, what does this match really mean?
Yeah.
What money is it going to draw? You almost, negated the whole thing because I don't know, maybe whether it be a foobar or an a Freudian slip, maybe you didn't mean to say it, or you
Hmm.
just again maybe complete and utter nepotism. But they're like, I think this is stupid, whatever. So I'm not going to
Yeah.
put it over.
And again, to me, that comes to again people who have theater backgrounds and improv backgrounds. They know the rules of yes and. They know the rules of building. Right, you're always building up. You never want to tear anything down. So anything that somebody establishes before you in improv, you want to build on it. You don't want to deny it. You don't want to cut it off. And it makes it better for everyone, including the audience, um, in the long run. And it's just some of these guys don't know that. It's just like the something they don't have in their knowledge base as far as here's a part of performance that you can build on and learn from. That if you come from a straight sports background or you know a non film television acting backgrounds, or don't really get into those things, you'll miss. You won't even know that you what you could have done to make something better than it was.
No, absolutely. Which again, as you have kind of in your career currently are portraying two different characters. You got
Hmm.
Kid Knight, Vladimir Tempest, right? And obviously, you didn't have this, when you started your career, right?
Hmm.
And even the wrestlers that you mentioned, and a Bray Wyatt or Undertaker and what have you, it, character development is almost I mean, it's crucial in every instance, right? But
Hmm.
definitely in these two examples, right, and yourself included, would be three examples. But a lot of people that get involved with wrestling, it takes a while to develop their character.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't say advice, but like in terms of discovering what your character is or what it could be, like where do you go to kind of discover these different kind of creative, avenues that you could go down in terms of your character work?
Yeah. So the again, and this applies. It's sort of different for depending on like what you mean by character. So I have a character both that's completely divorced from who I am as a person, beyond maybe some of my like political opinions like being parodied or whatever, as I speak and try to make jokes. But so what works for a character like Vladimir Tempest is going to be different than, let's say, like a Roman Reigns or someone who has a more um, uh, again, athletic competitor based gimmick. And that's honestly, that's like 90%, of I'd say most pro wrestlers. Even the ones who have gimmicks, it's more of an aesthetic. It's not like a character. They eventually, Undertaker had a gimmick, but eventually it just became sort of an aesthetic. It was gear he wore to the ring, and then he took it off, and it was basically sort of an over the top Mark Calloway, or Triple H, who he was a competitor. He was the cerebral assassin, is what they called him. But he takes off all of his Terminator stuff, and he's not trying to act like a cyborg, right? he's just being this sort of competitor. Um, but there is a way to find character in that, which is sort of like presenting something that's larger than life and over the top. Um, and for that, if I guess my advice would be, you sort of find sort of like knobs and dials on your personality. Um, and this comes after sort of, again, basic, what I would call sort of like basic public speaking type stuff, just learning how to speak, how to avoid saying how to pace your words, how to change uh, your candor, the camber of your voice, as you speak, sort of to get kind of the emotional resonance or the response you want from the audience. Um, so after that point, it starts out. You don't start inside for me. Again, this is I'm just being sort of a version of myself as a athletic version of myself competing. Um, the sort of the basics of getting a good version of that character. I start with the audience, and I start with what's the response that I want out of them. Do I want, if you're a heel, you sort of want them to be angry? Do you want, maybe you've got some sort of emotional storyline, somebody betrayed you, so you want to get that like sadness or that like betrayal style anger. There's a lot of anger in pro wrestling storylines, but I start with the result. So what do I want the audience to do? And then I go to like my toolbox, or what might be my own personality. And my goal isn't to be, if I want the audience to get angry, it's not, oh, I need to be angry and then the audience will mirror me. It's how do I take the audience from normal and make them angry? What things can somebody tell me that will piss me off? you know and then those are the things that I will say. Or how could somebody say something to me in a way that maybe, something that might sound normal, but they say it in a sarcastic tone? That'll piss me off. They say it, with a total lack of respect. That'll piss me off. So I start with the end goal, and then I figure out what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it based on, whatever the angle of the storyline is. So for Kid Knight and Vladimir Tempest, I feel like I'm now in the point, because I've been doing this stuff for so long, that it's a playground for me, and it's like I just sort of find ways to challenge myself to keep it fun. One of the best compliments I ever got in Super Awesome Showdown. I've been Vlad Tempest for 3 years. I've been Kid Knight for like 4 or 5 up to that point. And there was a fan who had been coming to the show for years. He was at every show or nearly every show, and he stayed after once to just like say hi and like help tear down the ring and stuff. And I came out like with my mask off. It's like he sees Vlad Tempest's face, in the Kid Knight outfit, and he was like, "Holy crap!" You know, he's like, I was really confused because I never knew that you were the same person, like played by the same person. It was years. He'd been watching the show for years at that point. But there was a lot of effort. Again, this is sort of like the sort of advanced playbook, which is, I look at again, this all comes from sort of like theater stuff, but what is my, each character, like I have a different sort of like standing pose. I look at the gait when I walk, and I adjust the gait when I walk. Vladimir Tempest has claws when he's, I sort of imagine he's got claws when he's locking up or when he's circling. Kid Knight, I've got just kind of like it's actually the southern like heel pose with like the fist at the hip. You can't see the fist on my hip, and the open hand, showing the open hand of the ref, because Kid Knight was sort of a little bit of like a dirty fighter, someone who, he was supposed to be fighting against in that show like the devil himself, these super duper evil villains with armies of demons, and he was kind of a regular guy, so he would fight a little dirty. So I try to show that with his stance, the way they move, the way they talk, all those things. There's all these little details that I intentionally put in place to separate them. so that if you saw me standing or speaking as one character and standing and speaking as another, you didn't see just like the same guy talking in a different voice. You saw someone who had a completely different stature and uh, style of movement and everything else.
No, and again, it's something that you do impeccably well. I can't put you over enough because, like I said, I that Vlad Tempest character, I'd never seen anything because like I was bringing up earlier, Ted DiBiase, you could make an argument that he is the theoretical grandfather of an Alberto Del Rio, right? And the
Hmm.
son being JBL, right? You get $1 Million Man, which is essentially a votary and a derivative of Vince McMahon, right? And then you get Texas Ted DiBiase is JBL, and then Mexican JBL is Alberto Del Rio,
Hmm.
But Vlad Tempest, I mean, this is version one. It starts here,
Hmm.
and I thought it was like again so intriguing, and I was just like, I
Well,
gotta,
there
I gotta
there
find
is
more.
a wrestling legacy a bit to how I present him. So some of it was born out of necessity. So Vladimir Tempest was originally a throwaway character. He was someone we put together that super awesome showdown. We needed a villain for a match because one of our most over heroes, a guy who wrestled as the Iron Butterfly, we put all the matches together. We had Iron Butterfly was available. We wanted him on the show. We didn't have an opponent, so talking with people and we put it together. And it was so I owned these fangs for a whole weird Ouroboros reason. Where before Super Awesome Showdown, when I was doing lucha shows, the thought was Kid Knight could get demasked and he would be a vampire. It would be like a double gimmick, like switcheroo. That never happened. But I bought these expensive fangs, these really nice prosthetic fangs that I just had. So I was like, okay, let's do this. Uh, uh, I don't know if you know SoCal Crazy, who's
Yeah,
a Southern California wrestler. He's a good buddy of mine, but I just remembered that when he started working, he wore a jumpsuit. He had like a blue, sort of like mechanic's jumpsuit that he wrestled in. And I was like, oh, I could get a jumpsuit, and then I could wear my Kid Night gear underneath. So I'll wear the jumpsuit, I'll put in the fangs, I'll be a vampire, so that after that match, I can take the jumpsuit off real quick and then go be Kid Knight on the same show, the real character that I was playing. So it was born out of necessity. And then some of the other, what was I going to say? My own influences was like, I was like, okay, so we have a vampire in a jumpsuit. The jumpsuit kind of looks like a spacesuit. We have this outer space themed show. I was like, what if I just do this like over the top, like 1950s sci-fi stuff, which I grew up like watching and loving, stuff like Plan 9 from outer space, as far as movies go, Flash Gordon, John Carter of Mars, just these like, really, there's a very specific vibe to like that 1950s sci-fi serial villain. So I was like, oh, I could be that. That can be kind of the inspiration to it. And the other side of it is something I touched on earlier is he's a foreigner. This is just a plain old foreigner gimmick for the most part. This is the Iron Sheik. This is, Nikolai Volkov. In the 80s and 90s, being a foreigner, especially a foreigner that America is at war with, was the gimmick, and that made you a bad guy just because you had a different nationality. I don't think that works. I don't think it's. I mean, there's still people who do it. I think the Russian guy gimmick is kind of I think, as a tribute. But the idea here is that he's always a foreigner. He's from outer space. He has a weird accent that's not quite accurate to a Russian accent. But he'll always be an outsider. He'll always feel superior. So, like, you know, NATO relationships with Space Romania will never change. So he'll always be a bad guy. He'll always be something that people don't, won't like, and he won't like you either. So it's definitely 100% inspired by those, evil foreigner gimmicks that you can't really do anymore. But I think in a way where I can bring in kind of the sci-fi fun element, theater element, but a lot of the stuff I'm doing is just the same stuff Nikolai Volkov did, the same stuff Iron Sheik did decades and decades ago.
Mace, you put your own spin on it because I mean, with all due respect to those gents, I mean, like I said, Space Romania. I was just like, actually, it's funny that you mentioned NATO because I was like, yeah, well, where does Space? I mean, Space Romania fall in the NATO, kind of pact? Are they getting?
Mhm.
Are they an ally? Are they not? Or are they? Do we have to deal with NASA to get to Space Romania? Like,
The
there's
Space
just so many.
Force.
Yeah, space. Yeah, that
That's a
was a
thing
thing.
now.
That's a thing. It's legit. There's t-shirts. My goodness, I don't know. But obviously, you mentioned your influences and everything, and you're a great menagerie of all of your all of your experiences. That has you know brought these wonderful characters that we could see in the ring, right? But
Mhm.
obviously, you didn't start out this way, and you had people who influenced you positively and even
Mhm.
sometimes negatively. This positive vibes only. Sometimes people do awesome shit when fucked up things happen to them, right? So,
Yeah.
um, I want you to take as long as you need. Let's get some shout outs of the way or people who have or places and things that have brought this wonderful menagerie that is Mason to us in the wrestling sphere.
Oh man, so many. 'Cause, yeah, it's like you said, it's a culmination of a lot of things and a lot of uh, some of it intentional and some of it happy accidents. But of like big influences, like theater wise, there was a woman, Priscilla Allen, rest in peace. She was the first person who was a really really good as an actress. She's famous for being the fat woman that Arnold Schwarzenegger comes out of in Total Recall.
Mm-hmm.
So but she was a character theater actress for her whole life up to that point and beyond, before and after. But that's kind of her big claim to fame, her most popular role. But she passed away a few years ago. But she taught me a lot about um, developing characters, and more so than developing characters, sort of the presentation of and your things like tone and volume to your voice, how you can totally sort of manipulate an audience in that way without actually, again, like yelling and screaming or going super method on people. She sort of taught me the craft of acting, that I'll be forever grateful for. Um, all the people who just inspired me to and encouraged me to pursue entertainment, which wasn't everybody. I didn't have like strong support like within my family to do this. They were there. They didn't try to stop me, but I got a lot of like rolled eyes and turned up noses, sort of from that part of my support group, or what's supposed to be my support group. But I've had a bunch of friends and a bunch of wrestlers and a bunch of actors who all supported me. Benny B Boy, who's a wrestler and a trainer here in San Diego. He was very early on, again back in the 90s. Meeting him and seeing him very early on, a very encouraging person and influence. Um, all the people who worked on Super Awesome Showdown, I think that was incredible playground where me especially, we all kind of got to learn and grow and experiment and do all the crazy things that uh, built the characters that came out of there. Geez, yeah. My fiance Manda, who was a big part of Super Awesome Showdown, and a big part of that. Just her creativity and her support for these sorts of things has been um, invaluable. Yeah, hundreds. I feel like hundreds of people. I wish I could name all these names. I tried to name a bunch of groups just to try to encompass everybody, and there's 100 people I'm forgetting. Um, So yeah, just super appreciative. And even I even think that people who weren't in charge of me, but like other wrestlers I was able to train. Man, I learned so much. Teaching and training, and I got better and more refined in my character work and my wrestling ability just being able to train people and have people trust me in that way. So I don't know. I wish I wrote down notes like they do at the Oscars for a question like that, but everybody, and you know who you are, and if you think you might be, you probably are. So everybody that helped me or had a part of it, I can't thank them enough.
Absolutely, and you can also go the Sally Field route where you like me, you really like me. You know,
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah. Anybody who thinks I'm cool, you're the best.
you're fucking
Yeah.
cool. So I think everybody is the best because I mean anybody that's seen you work or will after this, they're gonna
Yeah,
think you're pretty fucking cool. So shout out to all of you. You know,
yeah. And for all the people that don't like me or think it's lame, well, I don't care because there's enough people who do like it that it thankfully rolls like water off a duck's back.
damn right, damn right. Now, Mason, for people that want to get to know more about you on the socials, to find out more about Super Awesome Showdown, and I've linked a couple of things in the description here, but I've done it, but it bears repeated. Where can they find you and it on the socials?
Yeah, so you can search. You could find me. I'm at Digital Mace, Mase. That's because my real name is Mason. On uh, on Twitter, I'm really awful at branding because I do a lot of things. I do wrestling, I work on video games, and I kind of have to try to find a middle ground where people who know me from these different spaces can all land on the same page. Um, but yeah, at Digital Mace, you can search the Space Romanian Army on Facebook. You can search Kid Knight on Facebook. You can find me on Facebook. Although if I don't know you, I may not add you. But if you seem cool, I might add you anyway. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm on LinkedIn, I guess. If you do LinkedIn, same name, Mason Z.
I
And
absolutely.
for I was gonna say for Super Awesome Showdown. So that show ran for 5.5 years. It got better and better every time. It became just a massive production. I've never seen a production that had as much production quality. So light, sound, video, music. It was an incredible team of people that put that together. Um, and they all worked their asses off. But you can find the evidence of that. You can search Super Awesome Showdown on YouTube, and you'll find all the videos there. Uh, we're hoping to get a bunch of encouragement. Maybe we'll be able to do one more show. Maybe we'll start it back up. But that's uh, that's where that stands, because that's the first thing people are going to ask. When's the next show? Who knows? Maybe never again. But you can see the evidence of what we did on a Super Awesome Showdown on YouTube.
I love that there's evidence still there because there's a lot of creative minds that went into it. So, and again, just a place to kind of let your the freak flag fly, as Glenn Hughes of Deep Purple says. So I dig it, man, and just to see people get creative, and hopefully people can get inspired in their own right to create whatever super awesome showdown is in their head and their mind, and be fulfilled that way.
Yeah, yeah. I can. One of the reasons I'm just getting back into the indie scene, and that's because for 5 years, Super Awesome Showdown was perfect. It was exactly sort of what I wanted. So we didn't a lot, and it felt the same way for a lot of the people there. We didn't want to go anywhere else, and we didn't have to. So we were very, very fortunate. But yeah, and that was as simple as get your friends. Your friends have talents. We were luckily we were four. The people who founded it. We were four guys who were trained to be pro wrestlers. Some of us knew how to do video editing. Some of us knew how to do web mastering. Some of us knew how to do theater and stage lighting. Uh, and we took the wrestling and all these extra skills, and we were able to just combine it and bring everything we had to the table to a really cool project. And I think that's something, if you're a creative person, or even if you've got two hands and an idea. uh, for us, it was really just like nothing to it but to do it. It was a lot of heavy lifting and hard work, but if a bunch of chuckleheads in San Diego could pull it off, something that big, I can't wait to see what anybody else out there who's inspired to do something gets done.
I love it. I love it. And some of the kind of manic things in the brain and noggin and wanting to lick that and show it off. That's one of the reasons why this podcast exists. So, in some ways, you might have fortified this very thing. And directly by being on, you've done it. So, Mason, I'd like to thank you for joining us here at According to Woods.
Cool. Thank you for having me. Can't wait for the next episode. I'll become a fan since I found out about you, so I'll be watching the next one.
Oh, Mario Yamasaki's, that gets the heart. I appreciate it. And we'd like to thank you for joining us here at According to Woods. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to the According to Woods podcast on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. Mason, you're subscribed to the podcast, aren't you?
I am. I am on YouTube.
See? So be like Mason and be this awesome creative force, and also subscribe to the podcast. But if you don't believe me, you don't believe Mason, and I don't know why you wouldn't, here's another pro wrestler, Zeta Zhang, to help convince you.
Hey, this is Zeta Zhang. Make sure you subscribe to According to Woods